without a doubt, I think it's by far the best league in Europe.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League?
Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser TV Premier League show. This is Match Week 13 recap and look forward to Match Week 14. Cannot believe we are already past Thanksgiving, Paul. Can't believe that we are on our way to the next most obnoxious holiday that's en route. And can't believe the Premier League season is honestly a third of the way done, to be totally honest with you, other than the fact that it feels like it should be over with by now because we've had enough international breaks for an entire year crammed into the first 3 months. So how are you, my friend? Survived the holidays, I see?
I did survive the holidays. We're going into December. There's like 30-some days in December, which means we're going to get about 90 matches here to talk about.
That is something I was making a mention in the Discord channel today to some of the other contributors and volunteers, reminding them that this is a part of the time of year where everyone gets busy personally, professionally, and then on top of it, the brainiacs in England decide they're the only league in the world that has to show how smart they are by playing more matches during a time of year where the rest of Europe decides to take a little breather and let people relax, recharge, and maybe not blow out Achilles or hammies or whatever else the injuries that we're seeing left, right, and center. But I think injuries will probably be a topic for a different day. Let's start like we always do here, taking a look, kind of a 10,000-foot view at the match week as a whole. What it wouldn't be is a Premier League weekend without some red cards flashed up on the screen, as they are trying their hardest to effectively re-referee matches and change the rules while we go. But I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about at least one of these red cards in a little bit more detail later because it's one of our featured topics. But I'd like to start here. We're going to shy away from the City Liverpool game. We're going to do a little bit of that in more detail. Let's start here Sunday morning. We'll go a little out of context. Let's start with Aston Villa 2, Spurs 1. Really interesting match. Really different lineup put out there by Spurs and Ange. What does this talk more about, Paul? Is it more about Villa's resilience, or is it really about the bloom coming off of the Tottenham Rose a little bit here? The wheels coming off, 3 straight defeats. They are down a ton of bodies, ton of guys on suspension. But I don't think any Spurs supporter would have expected that starting lineup from Ange in a competitive match. And for him to go at it that way almost makes you think he really thought they were going to go just attack Villa and beat them.
Yeah, I mean, I think Spurs have they have a lot of issues, right? I mean, like when you look at that injury list that Spurs is dealing with, it's pretty lengthy. You got Romero out on suspension. So, I mean, he's got some things that he's got to deal with here. But, yeah, I mean, this is like Lo Celso, I forgot he was even on that team, to be quite honest still. Like, I feel like I haven't seen him in years because he was a mainstay in that lineup for a few years. I believe
First
it was
match, first league match he has started since Nuno's final game in charge.
Okay, yeah, so it was Nuno's. All right. Yeah, so, I mean, they're definitely, I mean, obviously Van de Ven hurts them, Madison hurts them, Richarlison hurts them. Like, I mean, they've got a lengty list of, like, guys that you would normally see in here. So, not totally shocked to see them in an unconventional lineup. I am shocked that players like Højbjerg aren't cracking this lineup right now. But, yeah, it was a little bit strange. I mean, you see, like, I think the thing that jumped out to me is, like, going into this lineup, excuse me, knowing that Villa is such a strong attacking side and seeing, like, Emerson at center back, I'm like, all right, that has the potential to be a very long day for Tottenham, right? So, and it was a good match, but I think it is what it, like, what that lineup suggested it would be. I think what really killed Tottenham is just the difference between these two sides in this match for me was that just Tottenham wasn't clinical in front of goal. They had chances, and it doesn't help when you have 9 of them chalked off for offsides. So
right. I mean, Son was literally had a hat trick of goals chalked off for about less than 2 feet worth of being offsides. And I still think one of them, I'm with you. Go to the Dutch rules, and he's onside all day with thicker lines, and it's a different outcome. So on the Villa side, Villa's win. We're going to look at the table. Big win, takes them level on points with Liverpool, slides them into 5th position on goal difference alone, puts them in a great position. Interesting here, Villa makes a double switch at halftime. I think everyone watching the match knew that Matty Cash, as anyone who listens to this podcast knows, the heart and soul of the Polish national team, Matty Cash, he had to come off at halftime of that match because he was not finishing it. He had at least 2 good second yellows in the last that first half. But to take Diaby off as well, who really was ineffective throughout the first 45 minutes and didn't really look up for it, he brings on Bailey, who's been, Jekyll and Hyde his whole Villa career, and it's classic Unai Emery. Basically, everything good in the second half runs through Bailey, running at them, taking the ball wide, and setting up Watkins. Watkins does what he does. He gets one chance, he buries it, and they take the lead. 2-1. Tottenham basically chases it the last few minutes. How far can this Villa side go? And at what point will Unai Emery get some plaudits outside of just this podcast of dopes like me and you talking about how he's the 3rd best manager in the Premier League?
Well, I literally think that's where he's going to have to finish to get it. I think he's going to have to finish top 3 to get it, which is crazy to me because he's just been consistently so good his entire managerial career. I think Villa. So I think what is happening for Villa right now is they're healthy, right? I mean, and that certainly helps. That's the opposite of what's happening with Spurs right now. And they're doing it by, they're doing it with those added Europa competitions where they're having to go to the dredges of Eastern Europe and play these crazy Thursday games. So, I mean, they're doing well with what they have. I have questions as to how long they'll continue to stay healthy, that's going to be the big thing. And if they can stay healthy, you look at this match, they very quietly, not only dictated most of this play and were the more clinical team in front of goal, but they're bringing Tielemans, Bailey, and Ramsey off the bench, three great players. And, it's early days for Duran, but he's another quality young attacker. They're very quietly have a good nucleus of young talent that they're bringing off the bench as well. So I don't think that this team is anywhere near its ceiling, which is kind of crazy to think about. And they're tightly managed. So they have the real potential, if they stay healthy, to make some serious noise here down the stretch.
Yeah, and they also have, arguably the best goalkeeper in the Premier League outside of the 2 that fight for Brazil national team starting roles in Ederson and Alisson. He's probably the next best keeper, as much of a batshit crazy ass as he is.
I was going to say, and arguably the most obnoxious goalkeeper in the Premier League.
Oh, fully. I think that's there's no question there. Jordan Pickford does still play in this league.
Sure.
But he's right up there. They got that. And then you look at the center backs now, between Konza, Diego Carlos being healthy, and Pau Torres is a perfect foil for what Unai Emery needs him to do. And they knew what they were getting when they bought him. It was just the guy just doesn't seem to make mistakes in the transfer market. And, we'll kind of dovetail here to another match that all anyone would have to do is be a West Ham supporter and have been forced to watch Danny Ings slug around the pitch for 80 minutes and make you realize that Villa doesn't miss. And, West Ham will continue to be West Ham, because they thought they were getting a march because they picked up Danny Ings from Villa and he would do this job they needed. And they got a broken down player, and Emery dips into, you mentioned it, the Duran kid from the Chicago Fire. Yeah, he's raw and he's got a lot to prove before he becomes a Premier League level striker. But Danny Ings is done, and West Ham wasted $20 million on him just trying to put a Band-Aid on it. And they got a kid, this Mbamba kid, sitting at the end of their bench who's raw as the day is long, but did more in 10 minutes of play at the end of the match against Burnley than, Ings probably has done the entire season, maybe his entire time in a West Ham uniform. So that Burnley outfit, at this point, are they just sticking with Kompany because their plan is to go back down with him and hope he sticks around for another year in the championship and then he can rebuild and come back up? Or do they genuinely believe that he's the guy that can turn it around, or that there's nothing better out there? Because to me, losing that match to West Ham the way they did, I mean, if that doesn't get you fired, I don't know what does.
It's got to be. I mean, the plan has got to be to stay with him. I just don't know why, there wasn't more of a concerted effort to get established talent into that side going in, because I think they did a good job getting these really nice, they got some really nice young pieces, but you can just see the inexperience across that entire team. And there's no veteran nucleus in there to sort of lead that team, outside of players that are let's face it, championship players, Rodriguez, ton of experience, great guy, 34. And he's just is what he is. And he's always been a championship player, even when he was in the Prem, in his prime. And so, yeah, I mean, they've got some nice pieces. They just needed to get some established leadership with Prem experience that was Prem level talent. And they just never got that. And I don't understand why that wasn't a focus going in, because it's got to be, if they're going to do this again. You can't just yo-yo back. And I mean, I guess Norwich has proven you can. But we also haven't seen Norwich in a while, so maybe you can't. So,
yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say, I don't want to spend too much time on a 2-1 match that basically had zero appeal and reason to watch it, other than the fact that West Ham really did steal a player in the Kudus coup, signing him from, I think it was Ajax, right? He is a special talent. He created both the goals. The second cross, if you haven't seen it, go find it on YouTube. Check the highlights out. He picks out Souček at the back post. Granted, the guy's 7 feet tall and the size of Lurch, but it's just a picture perfect cross, and you can just see the player. I don't know if they'll be able to hang on to Jared Bowen. This might be the summer that they have to cash in on him. At some point, they will. But if they do, my God. Sign a striker and start building around the kid, because that kid in the midfield is what you should be building everything around, in my opinion. Just what a player, what a signing that could turn out to be.
Yeah, they're going to have to hire some sort of consulting agency if they go into the striker market, because it has been the curse of Antonio for they try to replace Antonio every year, and they get somebody who looks promising. It doesn't pan out. Antonio comes back, and then he's injured 4 days later. I don't know. They got to figure that out.
It does almost. We'll hit on a couple here, focusing kind of on the captains a little bit. So Chelsea, Newcastle, kind of a match of the two captains, to be honest. You have Reece James just lose his mind, pick up 2 yellow cards ridiculously, get himself sent off. On the other side, you have one of the better unspoken stories all year long is Jamal Lascelles at Newcastle. He's been there since he was 11 years old. He's been the captain since before Steve Bruce. I think Rafa might have even made him the captain when he was in his first stint there. And Eddie Howe came in and said the funniest thing was everyone wanted him to strip him, give it to Callum Wilson, give it to Isak, give it to Bruno Guimaraes, right? And Eddie Howe said the easiest thing was never even considering taking the armband off Lascelles because of how hard he worked and for the respect that he had of everyone in the dressing room. Everyone raved last year about Newcastle's defense and its stability. And it amazes me that with all the ups and downs of their extra matches in European competitions, they are still really resolute at the back and doing really well defensively in the Premier League, even though Botman's been out for periods, Schar's been out. And that comes down to a lot of it, I think, is that Lascelles was able to just step right back in, and he delivered with a goal in this match. He played really, really well. I thought he played really well within himself. Basically, he and the other center back, Schar, just kind of just took Nicholas Jackson completely out of this matchup and even kind of nullified what's been, a really, really good Cole Palmer. Pochettino was up in the crowd serving a suspension for this one. Chelsea never really looked up for it, in my opinion. This a big 2 steps back, or was it just, a bad day at the office for the fact that Chelsea had to go on the road to what is arguably one of the toughest places to go play, and Newcastle was up for it, had their match winner in Isak playing, and just too good for them right now, Paul? Or is this something we got to worry about? Because we were talking pretty highly about Chelsea over the last 3 to 4 weeks. What Pochettino's
I think Chelsea's a little bit. I think Chelsea's in a little bit of. We talked about this. They're going to be a team in transition this year, right? And like we talked about, what's scary is that they are finding some sort of consistency lately, right? But I think this is that sort of next stage in a rebuilding team, right? Like you do this, you take 2 steps forward, you usually have 1 step back, and you like. But the thing is Poch is smart enough to learn from this and make adjustments. I think one of the things he's probably going to find out is that you can't start a 40-year-old in the back in the Prem. You can't. And I think this game was probably still in the balance until Silva just buried it with a mistake, right? And I think, I think you're going to find some things out. I think what's interesting is Chelsea is still going to have the issue where the core of its youth movement still seems to be the best thing it has going for them, even though its first 2 subs off the bench are about 150 million pounds worth of players coming on. So, it's just it's an interesting side. I still think. I think Palmer looks like a steal for them. I still think he looks really good. But they've got some stuff to figure out. What are they going to do with Nkunku coming in? What happens with Jackson? Because Jackson's been real. I feel like he runs real hot or cold. And so they've got some stuff to sort out. The James double yellow was just dumb. It's just. You can't ever have that foul when you're already on a yellow. It's so brain dead. It wasn't their day. Newcastle's a tough competition, and I think once they made the mistake and that third went in, I think they just kind of switched off really for the rest of that game. But I think Poch is gonna see stuff in this match that's gonna make them better down the line, and that's probably what's scary for the rest of the league.
Yeah, as time goes on, they're going to win because they have the resources and they have really talented players. And now they, in my opinion, have an actual coach that can get more out of the talent that they have. He's going to have to be given carte blanche to sell some of these guys, though. And I think that's going to be the hard part because, no one's going to buy Mudryk. No one.
Right.
You couldn't sell him because he's not sellable. It's like what, when the United folks try to clear out, it's like you can only clear out what people are willing to buy. Right. You can't force people to leave, which is why Harry Maguire is starting at center back, because it got so bad that he actually won his way back. Speaking of United, quickly here, I almost feel like you have to. One, the goal was ridiculous. Garnacho kid's got all the talent, and he clearly has all the confidence to go with that level of talent. He's clearly a little bit insane, and you probably need to do that to succeed at that age, at that club, trying to act that way. But the audacity to even attempt that off a cross from outside the box is one thing. To bury it is a whole nother. Really, really big on him. Feel for the Everton supporters. They couldn't even get to their 10-minute mark for their corruption. It's like the whole world was already tuned in. They thought, on the 10-minute mark, we'll all hold up our little corruption placards. And before that, they were cheering on a goal for the opponent because they couldn't believe what they just saw. I will say this: we criticize captains a lot, and and I know I raise my hand and criticize the captain of Man United. Bruno Fernandes probably showed his first credentials as United captain by actually taking the ball and handing it to Rashford, as much as it killed me being the last person in America to have him on your fantasy team. But it was good. That was a good job because nobody needed a free goal more than Marcus Rashford did. I don't even know that Kai Havertz needed that goal as bad as Rashford needed that goal, because Kai Havertz is just a bum at any club. Rashford is, arguably their talisman. So I think that was a good job by Fernandes to hand him the ball. I don't know he would have done it if it was 0-0, and I don't know that he would have done it had there been 2 minutes left in the game. But I'm not going to judge the guy's motives. I think it was the smart decision, and he clearly had the ball. He could have taken it. He knew Rashford wanted that goal. He gave it up. Rashford buries it. And if Rashford kicks on now, that is something that if Mo did that to someone on Liverpool, I'd be like, that's good job by him. That's a good teammate. He recognized it. So,
yeah, I like to think that baby-faced, humanitarian Rashford was actually just like issuing just the most insane verbal threats in Portuguese under his breath before getting the ball handed to him. But yeah, no, it was credit where credit due. I mean, this game was the most Everton thing ever. I mean, you come out. I thought, we were wondering we thought there'd be a ton of energy here and that this would make this interesting. And Everton came out with a ton of energy, get scored on 3 minutes in by Worldy, get a pen kick, and then Anthony Martial, who scores once every lunar eclipse, comes in and scores the third one. It was just the most Everton thing ever. And at the end of the day, Everton was probably the better team throughout the entire match.
Yeah.
So it's just
Dominic Calvert-Lewin could have scored 3 in the first half.
Yeah.
Onana was wrong-footed again. Just really interesting. Well, it's funny. We talked about Bruno doing a good job as captain and Lacazelle's good story. We talked about the ridiculous red card from Reece James. And we didn't even talk about the most boneheaded or crazy-ass moment for a captain in the entire Premier League this weekend, because that, my friend, goes to Lewis Dunk. Lewis Dunk, who became the first Premier League player to be shown a straight red card for abusing a matchday official on the pitch in 15 years. Most people on the broadcast thought it was 2 yellow cards for dissent. No, he got a yellow card for dissent, was then shown a straight red card for what he said to Anthony Taylor. Now, I ask you, Paul, because I know you could get some shit up out your mouth. Do you think that you could have gotten sent off that quickly? Because, it's been 15 years since a player was sent off while the match was ongoing. There's been a few. Lee Catamol got one after a match ended. Neil Mopé got one after a match ended. But, this is a player sent off for abusing the match day official, the actual thing. So he's getting extra matches now, too, for his suspension. How bad is what he said?
So, first of all, you're probably asking the wrong player, considering the fact that I got a straight red in a high school playoff game for pantsing a player, but on a set piece. But anyway, but I get my money's worth. I didn't even look, I saw this be a straight red later in the day, but I did not see what was said. I do know, based on his reaction when I was watching this, that he seemed like a player that was bent on just self-destructing. If you watched him, it was it reminded me of when I was married and my other half was not wanting to fight and I was pissed off. So I just kept needling it until it turned into a fight. Right. It felt like he was only going in one direction on this. And I don't know why he was so hell-bent on it in the first place. He just self-destructed.
Yeah. I was going to say, you know what it reminded me of? It reminds me of that scene almost in Hoosiers, for anyone who's watched the great basketball film, where he decides, I'm getting tossed here, so the alcoholic has to coach the rest of this game. And he's like, I'm going to start screaming, and you're going to throw me out of here. And he's like, what? And he's like, just do it. And then he does it. It's almost like he was talking to him, I'm going to do this because I need my teammates to get fired up. We're in a bad way right now. I'm getting tossed out of here for, the emotional investment. But I will say, as I put on,
he was like, no, not stay. Red is second yellow. Like,
it's dumbest red card ever. But how about the handshake? Because he gets sent off for the crazy ass event. Taylor points 3 times, like, you gotta go. And then he pauses, turns around, and goes back and asks Anthony Taylor to shake his hand. And Anthony Taylor actually, like, pauses and does it and gives him the handshake. And I thought to myself, like, what in the Christ is going on? But on a serious note, on the serious side of things, right? We've been critical. We've been critical on this podcast. At times, I've been critical of Klopp sometimes for his demeanor on the pitch and on the sidelines towards match day officials and how it permeates to players in tough spots. I've been overly critical of Arteta for being too emotionally invested and then it kind of bleeding through to his team on the field. De Zerbi is kind of picking up that mantle right now of the new manager that the PGMOL hates and the guy who says, I hate 80% of the refs. Is this a good thing? Like, where is that fine line when your captain's getting sent off for not taking a run at a match official, taking a run at, honestly, the most respected match official in all of England? I don't know that this is helping Brighton, especially in the position they're in right now, trying to battle on all these fronts.
Yeah, man, I missed like the Brighton of like 3 weeks ago when they were the crown jewel of the Premier League, right? Like, I just feel like, I don't know what's happened, but like, yeah, like when De Zerbi came out with those comments that were like, look, those comments that he made were pretty targeted. Like, I mean, it was like basically not like it wasn't like the standard of officiating needs to be better across the board. It was like, I don't like British referees because of the way they behave on the pitch. Like there's somebody that they're not. And like when he like I'm paraphrasing obviously, but when he said it, I was like, yikes. Like you know what I mean? I was like, this is not going to go well for you. Like this, it's not. And like, you know, obviously we would hope that there would be no like sort of retribution on the pitch in a competitive way. Like that would like tilt the balance of these competitions. But like, I also think that that's pretty wishful thinking. And like, we now know that they're not going to get any breaks. And we now know that all he did was put an unnecessary target on that club, in my opinion. And so I think it's unfortunate. I will say, I don't think that I disagree with anything he said, but I think it is your responsibility as a manager to be a good steward for your club. And I think in that instant he wasn't.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I don't know if you saw the final whistle because they get the penalty pretty late. No, they get the penalty to level it, and then they get the João Pedro winner against, with the 10 men, the header. Really nice finish by João Pedro. Comes off the bench, scores 2 goals, after Ferguson had scored earlier in the match. And I just don't understand it. Someone's going to have to explain to me how their best team isn't Evan Ferguson through the center with João Pedro playing off of him. Someone's in Matoma running in from the wing. Like, to me, that's their best. It doesn't make sense to me why those two don't. It's like he doesn't think Pedro and Ferguson can play well together because it feels like any chance he can, he just plays Welbeck with one of them just until Danny Welbeck runs into a cul-de-sac that he can't, and then he realizes, I still can't shoot. I still can't score.
There's got to be a tactical reason. There's got to be something that like he requires from a shape perspective that he can't get from those two playing together.
That's what I was assuming, or just João Pedro just doesn't work hard enough. But you don't spend that kind of money and have it go. So, I thought this was interesting because we were talking about Brighton and kind of their ups and downs. We've talked a little bit about Newcastle here. As we come out of this Thanksgiving and this international break, we ramp up to a really big week in the Champions League, a really big week in the Europa League, and of course the Europa Conference. Because this is match week 5, right? This is really when you start to kind of turn that corner. Or is this 4? I can't even remember. Is this 4 or 5 that they're going into? I think it's 4 actually. They've all played 3 matches so far. Or maybe 4. I think
you're right.
Whichever one it is, it's a pivotal one, obviously, for them. are European commitments worth it to all clubs? And I know everyone wants European nights, and Newcastle supporters are never giving up that night. They're all going to be able to say, we saw, our boys beat Kylian Mbappe and PSG on our home pitch. But at what point to a club like Brighton, to a lesser extent West Ham even, and now especially Newcastle, do you have to really juggle those extra commitments, and where do you balance that? Because I don't feel like Brighton or Newcastle are really getting that right at this point, or maybe they're just not deep enough.
Yeah, I mean, like my thought on this is that it feels like a hamster wheel where the only winner is UEFA. Yeah, you cram all these competitions in, they win because, I mean, they're the windfall for the revenue, right? I think it's really tricky because I think, like, in order to compete and sustainably win on all fronts, you need to have – it's a catch-22, but you need to have a bigger squad, right? Well, the problem with that is like you've got to fund a bigger squad. You need these competitions to do that. Well, what happens when you get a bigger squad and then you crash out because you can't compete against all fronts, right? Because you can't afford to basically fund two squads that rotate, or you don't get the right pieces. You whiff in the transfer market. You bring pieces in to build out your squad. You miss. Now you've got an inflated wage bill without those extra competitions to cover it the next year, and you're crippled. So I think the takeaway here is it worth it for a club? I think it certainly is, but I also think it's extremely high risk, I think it's extremely high risk if you're not one of the big four, right? If you're not one of the big 4 to 6 clubs in England and you go in and you try to build out some depth to do this and you miss, you're in a really bad spot. So I think it is, but I just think you're getting in some heavy seas on this if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think where it comes down to is if you make the Champions League, you have no choice but to go for it. Be excited, play, take all the money, try to buy some players, and you have to compete. And I think that's the real hard one, because then you're just starting your best 11 usually, and you're rotating into the league, which weakens your second competition. It weakens what should be your primary competition to compete in the elite. I think when you're in Europa, you have you got to make a balance and decide. And we've seen it, right? We saw West Ham go all in with the Europa League the year they got all the way to the semifinals. Mm-hmm. And they came up just short, and they were so bummed out. And then the following year, they got their rewards in the Europa Conference League. They won their European trophy, competed in Europe for the 3rd year in a row, which is great for West Ham and for the coffers, right? But let's be honest, 2 of those 3 seasons, they were in a relegation battle till late in the year, while also competing in Europe because they only could play one set of basically about 13 total players. And I think if you're Brighton, I think you can go into the Europa League and go for it. I really do once. Mm-hmm. But let's say Brighton crash out. They don't make the group stage, or they make it to the group stage and they get knocked out in the round of 32 because they get, one of the parachuted teams down from the Champions League in the most ridiculous of scenarios that's ever available. Hey, I got an idea. Let's have the secondary competition and take 8 of the teams from the other competition and drop them into it with a better opportunity to win it instead of the teams who qualified through and had to slug through the first. It's the worst. I hate the parachute so much. But so now they come down, they get knocked out. I could see Brighton rallying second half of the year, but I could see Brighton also being like, I'd rather focus on trying to win the FA Cup or win the League Cup and putting our eggs in that competition than trying to requalify for Europe. Because I think at one point, Ari Redknapp had it right at Spurs. And he was like, you want me to win a domestic trophy. You want me to try to qualify for top 4. But then you all get pissed off at me for sending out 16-year-olds in Europe to play on plastic pitches on Thursdays and qualifying in August and losing on purpose. But I can't compete on all these fronts. So I think that's the part where I think if you become one of these teams that are perennially in this competition, I think the Europa League is where you have to really know yourself as a club, and you need to prioritize it. I just hope that Villa can find it within themselves, and Unai Emery specifically can find it within himself to play Duran and to play the kids, in that competition, because he's been running out Ollie Watkins and Diaby to start Europa Conference League games, because I know he wants to win that competition. And I just think in a year where the top 5 teams are probably going to qualify for the Champions League. And by the way, because of the Swiss format, every team's going to play 11 group matches next year in the Champions League.
Yeah.
So now,
and then we don't even think about, so say you go for broke in Europe, right? And you plummet down the table, you pull a West Ham. There are serious, I would need, I don't know the numbers exactly, and these teams probably have to have accountants crunching these things, but if you plummet down the table, you're almost better off not getting Europe comps and placing 6th or 7th, financially, than going for broke in Europe and landing at the bottom. Yeah, I mean, the Premier League table itself is a big money. And it's almost gotten to the point for me that if I was not one of the top, if I was not a team that I knew had a legitimate chance at a top 4 finish with a big squad, I'm focusing on the Premier League because of the amount of money there.
So speaking of the table and the order in which it resides today, and this is updated after today's match between Fulham and Wolves. Top half of the table sees Arsenal top of the summit, cleared over City by 1 point. Liverpool and Villa on 28, separated only by goal difference. And then, of course, Tottenham rounding out the top 5 on 26 points, coming off 3 straight defeats and having to play City on the weekend. I'm sure we'll touch on that. It's easy to laugh at them, but United quietly 4 wins out of 5 and all the way up to 6th place and 6 points off the top of the league, and people act like they are done, dusted, and dead. And I know they're not a good team, and I know that those points are a little bit of fool's gold when you look at who they played. But I do love how easy it is to have a funeral for, you can have a funeral for people you don't like and then realize they're not really dead yet. You're having the party as if they're gone, and then you're like, well, that season's not really ruined, seeing that they're right there.
They're still creeping at the back of the party near the punch bowl for sure. Yeah,
exactly. So, and then we talk, right, and look at where we go after that. We go into those 3 clubs we were just talking about who are balancing Europe and commitments that maybe are making it more difficult. Newcastle, Brighton, West Ham, and then Chelsea, the enigma that are round out this top 10. I feel like we do this every week, Paul, and I feel like every week we all kind of say, yeah, I think this top 10 will be about what the top 10 is just about when the season ends, some way, shape, or form. Of the sides from United to Chelsea, which of those sides has the greatest opportunity to really get themselves into a top 4 conversation? Is it Manchester United? Is it Newcastle United for you? Which one is it?
I mean, preseason, I said it was Newcastle. I kind of want to go back to where I was preseason. I still think just because they have such a solid defensive foundation, I think that if they can stay healthy and juggle this, I think they've got the best shot of those teams. I still think I like some of these things. I like some of the moves that Ten Hag's making right now. I really like that Mainu kid, and I think he's I think he's going to be a good player for them. I like the fact that Ten Hag is getting a look at some of these young players, and he's not afraid to put them in spots in the Premier League play. I just think Newcastle, they've got all the pieces. If they can stay healthy, they're going to cause problems. I think there's some serious question marks around a lot of these other clubs still. I mean, you can't look at Tottenham and feel any better than you did 3 weeks ago. That's for sure. That was the peak of their sort of what we were talking about. That was kind of where they peaked. Now, are they as bad as they've shown over the last 3 weeks? I don't think so. I mean, I think they're going to level out, right? I think there'll be some sort of regression to the mean here for them. I just don't think that means – I don't think their mean is top. I would put them probably 6th, 7th when this thing fleshes out, somewhere in there. And I think you got to ask questions of what's going on with Brighton. Can they handle the added comps? with where they're at. I honestly expect West Ham to drop out of this top 10. I just think they've got some nice pieces, but like if they have continued issues with Bowen and his health and Antonio, I think that they're going to have some problems down the line here. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it has been a pretty static top 10. But I think most of them have question marks there towards the bottom.
Yeah, I think the thing when you look at that top 10 there, the thing that jumps out at me is, it's 1 point separating Newcastle and United. Yet it's 17 goals in the goal difference because United scored 16 and conceded 16, and Newcastle can score with anyone in the division. Gordon's probably not getting enough credit for his step forward as a player this season for Newcastle and how well he is playing. Creating, Gamarish obviously add goals from midfield. Joe Linton is, it's just crazy to say it. He's a powerhouse of a midfielder, which is crazy when he was the weakest number 9 I'd ever seen play the game and now became a box-to-box number 8. But then, they have 2 strikers who can put the ball in the back of the net on any given day and win you a match as well. So and we all keep hearing that they're going to spend in January if there's players available. So I think Newcastle is the one for me. If someone crashes that top 5 and knocks Villa out, I think it's Newcastle. I really think that it will end up being that like Spurs United 5, 6, 7 with Villa, and they're all kind of fighting in those spots. When we get down to the bottom half of the table, and I don't disagree with you that West Ham might drop down. My only problem is if West Ham drops down, I have to take someone off this list and move them up. And I've seen nothing from Brentford that makes me think they're anything but a mid to bottom half table team. Wolves, the league won't allow them to accumulate enough points to get to the top half. And Fulham, Palace, Forest, Bournemouth are absolutely abysmal and all could get relegated if Luton, Sheffield, and Burnley weren't in this conference. It's crazy to me still that I look at this and literally Brentford is the only side, outside of Bournemouth now with 3 victories over the last 5 matches. Bournemouth starting to figure it out. Are they the team that maybe can climb themselves away based on their goals and the fact that maybe these players are starting to understand what the manager is asking for them a third of the way through here?
The only way I can see it is if they find some sort of semblance of defense. And I just think, them putting away Sheffield United is probably not enough to convince me otherwise. Well, that's fair. I think, we make jokes about the league, versus Gary O'Neill and stuff. But this side, you look at them and they go and they draw or beat Spurs, City, Villa, Newcastle. And then they turn around, they lose to Sheffield, Ipswich, Fulham. So it's it's totally, if they can iron out the schizophrenia, they might be. I think they're the team that I picked to push up here. I felt pretty good about Crystal Palace, but you look at them now and you think, oh, they're getting Elise back. That's going to be a big part for them. They can start scoring goals again because they've been so sound defensively, right? But then all of a sudden they look really vulnerable now defensively. You got Eze going to be out for probably 4 weeks, they're saying. And then they're afraid this Decore injury is a season-ending Achilles, and that is going to be a big blow for them because he does a lot of the dirty work in the midfield for them and really sort of tidies up that midfield. He is their engine. So if he's out for the season, I'm out on Palace. So, yeah, you're right. You look at this, and the best performing team, honestly, in this entire lot over the last 3 weeks has probably been Luton Town. So, just because they have been hanging in there, put some goals in some scrappy displays where they're getting points here. So yeah, this whole thing is gross.
So if you're thinking about that Luton Town Express, they got 9 points. They're 4 points ahead of the drop zone. I'm dead serious when I say this. I didn't think at one moment all year they'd be outside the bottom 3. I didn't. Yeah, I thought they would probably go down dead last, if not battling with Sheffield United. I underestimated how bad Burnley really is. And I think part of that is, I didn't want to touch on this earlier, and I do feel for the player, it is difficult when they put all their eggs in Lyle Foster being the guy to score them 10 to 15 goals, and he's suffering from, a serious bout of, mental health issues that aren't even allowing him to think about football, let alone train or play at a professional level. So, I don't want to make light of that. But again, if you thought Lyle Foster was going to be the reason that you were staying up, you probably also thought that Vincent Kompany was going to, go on to get the Man City job after coaching at Burnley. So,
Didn't Cosby have him in the top 10?
Oh, yes, he did. Actually, I think he had him as manager of the year, actually. Top half finish.
Oh, wow. You miss on some.
Yeah. Yeah, you miss some. You win some, you lose some. I also want to say that I swung for the fences, missed, and then was proven right when I said that Tonali could turn out to be the worst signing of any team in the Premier League.
Oh.
And everyone was like, but Tonali's amazing. He's so good. And I was like, I know, but I got some people in Italy that say, he doesn't want to be there. He looked like he was at, his own funeral at his unveiling. He didn't want to leave. He's going to be homesick. And then he comes out, plays like a world beater. I was like, well, that take's not going to end well. And then he gets suspended for the rest of the year. I'd say they probably wish they had that $80 million back. When you're starting one of the Longstaff brothers instead of your $80 million club record signing. So it's always good when you picked a player that you thought might actually flop, and it turns out that he's just a degenerate gambler that couldn't stop himself from betting on teams on an app inside the stadium. He was betting at AC Milan on AC Milan games in the building. I
just think he probably misunderstood. He probably just misunderstood the quote "when in Rome." You know what I mean? It's just
exactly. He was like, "Well, I thought it was Milan. I thought it was okay if I bet on Inter." But it's just craziness. So when we look at this here, you got a gut feeling here. Do you see Everton, another loss, the 10-point deduction? I still think that will be reduced, and they'll get 4 to 6 of those points back.
I still think that even if it's not reduced, they have enough to climb out of that. I just think I look at the teams ahead of them between Bournemouth and Luton Town, and I think those teams, and even honestly, I know Fulham won today, but I think Fulham is dog. I think they could just get. I think that could be the last 3 points you see in 2.5 months, and nobody's shocked by that. So I think Everton has. They've shown me enough to believe they can crawl out of that, and I think it's probably Luton, Sheffield, Burnley are the obvious picks there. Which is kind of wild because typically you see one team that you see a couple, it's usually one of those promoted signs that eats it and the other two somehow scrape by. But so this could be a year where all three just kind of go right back down.
I think it's a part of the fact that the league is so poor that it isn't as easy for those teams to accumulate points. I also think we're going to see lots and lots of really bad draws at the bottom of this table. And I think that's going to lead to kind of false hopes. It'll be interesting. It still blows my mind that nobody has sacked any managers as of this point yet.
Yeah, that is wild.
Crazy.
Because last year, I feel like there was a ton by now. We had 4 or 5.
Absolutely. I think Chelsea had 2 managers by now. Graham Potter was about to be fired. So speaking of the match of the week, we'll talk a lot about this on our Monday night podcast, but it would be remiss as a Premier League show to not touch on this for a couple minutes. Overall, Paul, not talking tactics or specifics, one side or the other, and taking our allegiances aside. Was it a good football match for you?
No. This game was what we thought it was going to be, right?
It's never good for me.
For anybody who happened to listen to our Liverpool pod, our Monday night live shows, when we talked about this, I think we were pretty much we felt pretty strongly that the early game coming off an international break would lead to a game that felt really disjointed and was ugly. I think I called a 1-1 draw, and I said both goals are going to be gross, and I feel like that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, no, you were spot on. I saw some say, good performance. I think it's a good performance by both sides because I think it was two sides going toe-to-toe with someone that they know very well as number one competition. both sides doing things a little differently than they've done in the past. So there's a little bit of that like prize fighter mentality. They were like kind of like throwing rounds at each other. I thought we were really I thought Liverpool was a little weak at the beginning of the game, maybe even a little naive with the way that we were trying to carry so much possession. But look, they score off an absolute mistake, but that shit can happen. You know, the clearance was the right play. If he gets it off, Mo's one-on-one with a speedy winger with a good chance of going in on goal, like we've seen many times in the past, he should be defended by two different midfielders. And then, God forbid, Nathan Ake turns into Messi ever again and dribbles through 5 players of Liverpool. One of the two center backs maybe would have picked their head up and found the best goal scorer in the world, run right in between them and tried to run with him. And none of it happened, right? So we give up the goal. That happens. They didn't wilt from there. They stayed attacking. I didn't think we created much in the first half. I thought as the second half went on, the difference in the match to me was one manager tactically tried to make changes because he had a bench that would allow him to do it. And every single thing he did worked. The other guy convinced 3/4 of his team to come down with injuries on international break so all of them could get sent home from international duty, started every one of his questionable players and made 0 substitutions over 90 minutes, coming off an international break going up against the number 1 rival in the league, and then had the audacity to talk about scheduling congestion after the match in his post-game press conference. So I ask you, how do we take these guys seriously if when given opportunities to sub-rotate, they don't, and then throw it in our faces as too many matches and the early kickoffs and these things? Like, was that match down to the Premier League being dumb and putting their match of the weekend at the earliest possible moment and less recovery? Or is this down to, once again, Pep kind of living by his own rules and then, trumpeting his own horn at the end?
Well, yeah, I think both can be true, right? I think it was dumb to have this match when they had it. I think this is like one of those things where you look at 2 squads full of internationals and you think, hey, we want this to be a box office match. Let's move it back. I mean, that's what makes sense to me, right? So I do agree with that. But I do think there's no shortage of egos between Jurgen and Pep, right? And I think they both display it in very different manners. And I think they both have very different separate personas. I don't think that Pep minds if he's branded arrogant. I think Jurgen does. I think my thing is I think that Pep didn't have a choice. Like, I think he needed to do that because he knows he doesn't have the depth. And I think, but I do think that both of these managers marry themselves to a starting 11 in different ways. And I think right now, I think Pep's married more than ever to a static 13, 14 players in a way he's never been in the past, because he has to be, because I just truly don't think they have the depth that he needs behind them. And part of me wonders whether this is just, if this is a slow death for them. And like, this is the fact that they have 115 charges sitting in court. They got rid of a bunch of dudes.
Yeah. They have to be careful and not spend and bring any more attention. And they missed on a couple. And that's ultimately like the Sergio Gomez kid on the bench isn't that good. We joked about Calvin Phillips. He's just not ever going to get a shot. Anyone who listened to the pre-match show knows I was, making all the jokes about, Oscar Bob basically sounds like it's a hairstyle that should take over Western Europe. And if you don't want the Oscar Bob, you should get the Rico Lewis. It just doesn't, they don't even sound like real players to me. And like literally, I thought Maka was in Kazu because I have the two of them and I'm talking to them about hairdos and both of them are like, I'd take either of their hair. So I'm glad you can understand it. We're gonna, barely. So we're gonna look at next week's matches as we wrap it up here. Obviously, I think we'll spend a good amount of time next week talking about Man City versus Tottenham. It'll be really, really interesting to see what does that look like Sunday morning. Can Tottenham bounce back? Tottenham is a type of team that sets up very well against City, always had with their hitting them on the counter, and Son has been a nemesis to them. So it'll be really interesting to see. I think that the Newcastle Man United game on Saturday afternoon, I'm actually psyched they moved that to a 3:00 game, so now I can actually watch it. I think this says the makings for a really good first weekend of football. And I just can't wait till Saturday morning to tune into the Arsenal match to figure out how the league is going to make sure that Wolves don't have a chance to win. But anything on here, if you could watch one match and one match only on this slate next weekend, which match are you getting in front of that couch with your big old bowl of popcorn?
Oh, man. This is the first time I've seen this. Like, I've looked at these matches for the weekend. And I got to say, I think that they're all fantastically intriguing in their own unique ways. Like, even Burnley Sheffield, like, Jesus Christ. Like, I almost, like, feel like you should, like, no one should voluntarily have to watch that match, but still kind of interesting. Like, I think if I'm choosing one out of this entire thing, I mean, City Tottenham seems so obvious that I've got to pick it, right? I mean, just because I think that both of these sides are really desperate. I do. I think that City feels like I think they're losing a little bit of that like quiet, assured confidence that they've always had that they're going to come away with 3 points. And I think Tottenham is in a spot where they absolutely have to have 3 here. So I think that has the potential to be fireworks.
I would agree. Now, will say the one thing I will add is that the Kulusevski son, Brian Hill, and Aronson and Brendan Johnson, that attacking lineup, especially early against Villa, was all over them and creating from all over. And you can see why people wanted Brendan Johnson so much from Forest and why Spurs did get themselves a very good player. His pace at one point, as he just dusted Luka Dean. And I was like, oh, man, that's a long day if this kid's outrun you in the first 5 minutes. And then your reward is later in the match. They'll switch and put Son out there to run at you instead. I thought that was really interesting. I think that could be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what City does. City will get better and better as the season goes on. We all know that, especially when John Stones is fit. John Stones has almost become – he's like right behind Rodri, honestly, in my opinion. It's like I think Rodri is 1A, Kevin De Bruyne 1B, and John Stones might be 1C. And then somewhere after that is when you get to like the Hollands and Edersons of the world, because I do believe you could plug and play different players into those roles. So as we always do, we wrap up the show with an ask. Please, if you haven't already, go to the YouTube page right now, smash the subscribe button, leave us a comment, share. If you can think of anyone else that might be would enjoy the content, please ask them to subscribe to the channel or share the links with them. If you yourself would like to get involved, drop us a message on one of our various different social media platforms, and we will get back to you as we are always looking for new volunteers. All right, Mr. Bickler, before we sign off, hit the bathroom and start this whole shindig all over again, I would be remiss to not ask you, at what point Saturday afternoon did you actually end being nervous and or uncomfortable regarding the Michigan-Ohio State outcome?
Man, the whole ordeal lasted till well into the night. I think I was still wringing my hands at like 9 o'clock just because I was like scouring the message boards for all the Ohio State excuses and bathing in the tears of my enemy. It was a fantastic day. I was also just physically exhausted from like the whole run of City Liverpool straight in the Michigan game. Yeah, it was a long Saturday. I woke up on Sunday feeling like I got hit by a truck. So, yeah.
Yeah, I will say, for a guy who can't really hang it on anything because I'm not like the hugest college football fan, but I have followed it all my life and rooted for the same team all my life, it was pretty goddamn painful to watch the end of that Auburn-Alabama game when you've been fighting Alabama people all your life and you thought you were about to just live it up and rip it to them. And maybe you put a future, and maybe at one point you put a future in earlier this year at 6.5 over, and they're finishing with 6 wins. Yeah, people. Yeah, it's a good thing my wife doesn't watch this show at the end. So everybody, live vicariously through us, win like Bickler, lose like Galley. It's not that hard of an afternoon. That's how Saturday rolled, people. We'll see what happens next time. Thank you for watching, as always. Please tune into the morning shows. Check us out. Fantasy shows, Thursday night, Monday night podcast. For myself and Bickler, everyone at American Scouser TV, we appreciate everything that you do to help the channel keep going. Thank you, and have a great night.